I'm standing here on a cold spring day in the old part of the city of Hamburg, in front of an iconic building, the headquarters of the Axel Springer business. That's one of the largest publishing houses in Europe, and it controls nearly a quarter of the German newspaper market, of which its own papers Die Welt and Bild are the most famous. 46 years ago, on the 19th of May 1972, the Springer building was attacked by a section of the Baader Meinhof gang, calling themselves the Commando of the 2nd of June. 17 people were injured, 2 severely, by bombs left in lavatories, and large holes were blown in the outside walls. The attack was the idea of Ulrike Meinhof, who with her colleague Andreas Baader lent her name to the group which terrorized West Germany with bombings, assassinations and kidnapping. The roots of the Baader Meinhof gang lay in a revolutionary socialist movement which started in West Berlin in the late 60s. It was fueled by anger against the Vietnam War and by what they saw as a repressive West German government turning a blind eye to former Nazis still in positions of authority. It was to reach its bloody climax within a decade, in one of the defining periods of post-war German history.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't want it so violent. It came to us.
In 1967, Bommi Baumann was one of thousands of young people who took to the streets.
The atmosphere was, in the beginning, quite happy. We said, okay, it's only a question of time till we take over.
But a tipping point came when the Shah of Persia and his entourage came on an official visit to West Germany in June 1967. There were demonstrations against the visit all over the country, but in West Berlin, things got out of hand. The police quickly lost control. The demonstrators were ferociously attacked, shots were fired, and a student, Benno Ornesorg, was killed.
They charged into the crowd, backed up by men on foot, sorting out the tougher elements.
You see this conflict, in fact, almost a war now between the Springer organization...
A frequent target of student anger was the powerful and conservative Axel Springer press, which openly supported the Vietnam War and called for a crackdown on student protest.
Cherished freedoms in any democratic country, I just wouldn't know.
A number of students were arrested during those protests. So-called lawyers' collectives came forward to defend them.
The French people say, is there a difference between legality and legitimacy? During the Third Reich, you had a lot of laws which made illegal very legitimate acts.
A radical minority believed the time for peaceful demonstration was over.
They'll kill us all.
Gudrun Enslin, the daughter of a Lutheran minister, issued a call to arms.
This is the generation of Auschwitz we've got against us. They have weapons, and we haven't. We must arm ourselves.
No, he was not so lovable person, to be honest.
Enslin's boyfriend, Andreas Baader, was another radical. Bommi Baumann again.
Because he was a typical macho guy. He was actually the opposite what we wanted.
Am Widerstand der außerparlamentarischen Opposition.
Ulrike Meinhof was well known as a left-wing journalist. She made a film in the late 60s about the German student protests.
An
admitted communist, she wrote admiringly about Baader's and Enslin's commitment to the cause and their willingness to use violence.
The bomb went off about 6 o'clock in the evening after most of the people had left the headquarters.
In May 1972 came 2 lethal bomb attacks on American army bases in Germany.
The American Air Force has dropped more bombs on Vietnam.
The radical group had struck its first target and issued a communique to claim responsibility. Dr. Kai Schiller of Durham University.
The reaction of the left in Germany could always see itself in reacting to the state as continuing an anti-fascist tradition, an anti-fascist counter-violence against the state, and that's why violence also was considered as being legitimate.
The authorities began by bringing in dozens of suspects.
The whole of West Germany's internal security forces, around 20,000 people, were mobilized to find members of the Red Army faction.
And as haul after haul of guns, bombs and grenades came into the possession of the police, the scale of the urban guerrilla problem became only too clear.
Well, joining me here in Hamburg are 4 people who will look back on those turbulent times. Stefan Aust, former editor-in-chief of Der Spiegel and publisher of Die Welt, and author of the Baader Meinhof Complex, a definitive account of the movement. Rainer Hoffmeier, former head of the anti-terrorist branch of the Federal Police Office, Kurt Grunewald, a radical German lawyer who represented members of the Baader Meinhof group, and from Milan on the line, Peter-Jürgen Bock, a former member of the Red Army faction, part of the unit responsible for the murder of the businessman Hans-Martin Schleyer in 1977, for which he received a life sentence and spent 18 years in prison. Stefan Aus, if I may begin with you, you've had a long-time fascination with the Baader Meinhof group, or RAF as you call it, RAF in German. You knew Ulrike Meinhof at a young age.
Yeah, because I'm from a small village near Hamburg, and I worked for the school newspaper together with a younger brother of the later husband of Ulrike Meinhof and the publisher of the magazine Konkret, where she was working as an editor-in-chief first and then as a columnist. And
that was a left-wing magazine.
Yes, actually in the early 60s it was financed by East Germany, which was a secret at that time. I didn't know that at that time. So I knew Ulrike from 66 to 69 when the student movement evolved.
What did you make of her as a person?
She was very well educated. She had a wonderful voice. She could argue in a very smart way, and she was quite arrogant. Everybody, who did not agree with her was unpolitical, like me.
And Kurt Grunewald, you got to know a lot of the RAF, the Baader Meinhof gang, personally very well. You represented them in court, for instance. What was your impression of both Ulrike Meinhof and Andreas Baader?
The first person was Ulrike Meinhof. I was her divorce lawyer. That's the beginning. And then
this was long before she was a terrorist.
Yes, she was not decided to go underground. It was 1969 or 68. Yeah.
Did she strike you then as somebody likely to get deeply involved in politics?
Yes, that was clear. She was a good journalist and was interpreting all the activities of the students' movement and of the Americans, Vietnam War, and so on.
And when you first heard that she had become a terrorist in RAF, did that surprise you?
Oh, the thing did surprise me.
And Rainer Hoffmeier, what was your impression of how determined that pair and their colleagues, they were both rather charismatic people, how determined they were that they would reach their goal in Germany?
The Red Army faction wanted to have a revolution in Germany. And therefore they have a dividing between a military wing, a militant wing, and an ideology supporting wing. And we think about 10,000 who supported the ideas of the Red Army faction.
Peter-Jürgen Bock, did you believe that? Did you believe that the people would eventually overthrow the German government?
I believed in the beginning that there will be a change. You have to realize at that time in high positions in government and other bureaucratic institutions, there were still fascists. In the time of being in the RAF, my point of view in this position changed.
But you met Andreas Baader, I think first when you were already in a youth detention center, is that right?
That's right. You have to realize how these youth detention centers work at that time. It was horror, you can say. And many detention centers, there was an uprising. At one of these occasions, I met them in Hessen in a youth detention center.
How long were you underground for?
You don't go with one step underground. It's a process. And I started in 1972, and it ended for me in 1979.
Stefan Aust?
But in general, it was a global war at that time, and there were countries in the Third World where they had revolutions, and you had the fight of the Vietnamese against the Americans, or better, the other way around, the Americans against the Vietnamese. So a lot of people identified with them, and this group was always a group that not only identified itself with it, but took part in this struggle, and took this struggle into the centers of the Western countries. That was the main problem.
Every single person who boards a plane at Tegel Airport in Berlin is checked against police records.
In the search for the terrorists, the German Federal Criminal Police Office, the BKA, developed Europe's most impressive computerized collection of clues or evidence, over 10 million bits of them, retrievable almost instantly.
It has details of everyone who has come to the attention of the police for whatever reason.
And the police had a real stroke of luck in June 1972. During a shootout at a house in Frankfurt, police arrested Andreas Baader and 2 of his comrades. Pictures of one of the arrested men, Holger Mainz, being dragged along in his underpants went round the world.
They have announced the arrest of Ulrike Meinhof, the woman who was regarded as the remaining leader of the so-called Baader Meinhof gang.
Baader, Enslin and Meinhof, with several other RAF fighters, were now in a specially constructed super prison at Stammheim near Stuttgart. But a second wave of Red Army faction people took over, and this was to be much more lethal.
Leg out! Leg out!
On the 24th of April 1975, a unit calling itself the Holger Mainz Commando stormed the West German embassy in Stockholm, taking hostages and demanding the release of the Red Army faction prisoners.
The trial at Stuttgart makes an Old Bailey trial seem like a 2-minute hearing at a magistrate's court.
The following month, the trial of Baader, Enslin, Meinhof, plus Jan Karl Rasper began in a specially built courthouse at Stammheim prison. The trial was chaotic, with none of the defendants recognizing the court's authority.
The result is that this morning only one of them is there, but not for long. By 9:16, he's insulted the judge and has been sent back to his cell.
We are still victorious because...
Meanwhile, a group of their followers, including Peter Jürgen Bock, traveled to Jordan to train with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a secular Palestinian Marxist-Leninist revolutionary organization founded in 1967 by George Habash.
We feel that more and more of the Arab masses are really supporting us.
Stefan asked, it was interesting that the Palestinian Liberation Front actually trained some of the RAF people. Did they have much in common politically?
It was the next door guerrilla group you could have contacts with. And they were training their own soldiers for the fight against Israel. And so friends from Germany were welcome, and so they trained how to shoot and throw grenades and things like that.
Andreas Baader was arrested by the German police in June 1972. It was shown on television, and Peter, what was the impact it had on you when you saw it?
From my point of view, Andreas and the others helped me to get out of this youth prison. And so I thought, now it's my turn to help them out of prison.
How did you manage to communicate with the prisoners? Could you write letters to each other? Was that legal?
No, it was not legal. We had a system of secret letters that they get. These letters were coded, and they gave commands.
So you were under orders?
You can say so, yeah. For us, it was an order.
Rainer Hoffmeier.
The German authorities are forbidden to intercept the communication from a suspect to a lawyer. And therefore, some lawyers were able to bring in and bring out letters, coded or uncoded letters, and it was in the court where immediately the lawyers were sitting next to the accused.
And Kurt Grunewald, this was an extraordinary and probably unique trial of German citizens. Since World War II, there hadn't been anything like it.
That is true. It was similar to the case of Chicago 8 in the United States, when Nixon came into power.
How long had you been working on this?
I was working only 3 years because I was excluded before the opening trials. There was a special law, and some of the lawyers, Hans Christian Schröbele and Klaus Croissant and we were excluded from the case. It was a political fighting because the federal police section, the your section, and the government was against us.
Could the public read about the trial in their newspapers on a daily basis?
Oh yes, there are only 3 cases in Germany after the war that were made transcripts of. It was Nuremberg, the Auschwitz trial, and it was Stammheim. They never agreed on anything the defendants and their lawyers and the Attorney General, but they agreed on one thing. They will put everything on tape and type it word by word. It is about 15,800 pages of transcript. So everybody knew that this was a very important thing. And what is very interesting, if you read all these transcripts, you can see that everything you can discuss about terrorism was discussed in that trial.
But where did the RAF get their money from?
From the German bank.
Robberies.
Did you take part in any of these raids yourself, Peter?
Yeah, in many. We said we shouldn't go for less than 100,000 marks.
And how did you do this? Through explosions?
No. Just going in, let the people handle you the money over and go out.
Did you point guns at them?
Yeah.
Did people behind the bank counter, did they get injured sometimes?
Sometimes, yes.
But the police, as we've established, had a unique computer system which collected thousands of bits of information about the terrorists.
Yes, we established in 1972 a new computer system, and in this computer system we had all information about the people, the institutions, the objects and the devices. We also have a surveillance system, and that means that the supporters, the suspicious supporters,
the suspects.
Sympathizers.
The sympathizers' name were put in this computer system, and in this way we could find out who are the members of the Red Army faction itself.
Good.
It produced a lot of cases for us, because all the people who had came into the system went to a lawyer and they find one, sometimes me, sometimes others. It is a crazy situation that so-called sympathizers were followed by the police, because so they make a system of fear, and it wasn't necessary. The police should make their work against criminals. That's clear.
But these were potential criminals.
Like Peter Brückler, like Böll, who was a Nobel Prize winner. All these people were followed by the police and were in the system. And the house of Mr. Böll was searched.
Some of these were intellectuals or writers.
Yes, only intellectuals, and they want they talked. They talked in a way the government don't like it.
Throughout the 1970s, the violence of the Red Army faction increased. In 1977, it escalated dramatically.
Generalbundesanwalt Buback ist heute
On the 7th of April, Federal Prosecutor General Siegfried Buback, one of the highest-ranking lawyers in West Germany, was gunned down in the street near Karlsruhe with his driver and his security man.
Die Schüsse fielen heute Morgen 9:15 Uhr auf dieser Kreuzung.
The next victim, Jürgen Ponto, chairman of the board of Dresdner Bank, was shot dead on the 30th of July near his home in Frankfurt. The intention was to force the release from prison of Andreas Baader.
Die Nachricht von dem Mordanschlag auf Hans-Martin Schleyer und die ihn begleitenden Beamten.
And on the 5th of September 1977, the car of Hans-Martin Schleyer, the head of the German Employers Organization, was ambushed in Cologne.
Nicht anders, Bergwurster und Göbel.
Schleyer was kidnapped. That evening, the Chancellor, Helmut Schmidt, went on air to steady the nerves of the nation.
Uns erfüllt
In the long term, terrorism has no chance, he declared. Not only is the will of the state against it, so is the will of the people.
Sie wollen den demokratischen Staat und das Vertrauen der Bürger in unseren Staat aushöhlen.
Let's talk first of all about Chancellor Schmidt's address to the nation, because it was an extraordinary address, watched probably by about 3/4 of the German nation. You would remember it, Stefan Aust, at the time.
I think for the state of Germany, they were really lucky to have a chancellor like Helmut Schmidt, because he was very outspoken, he had a clear position, and he could keep his forces together. It was the only time that the government itself, that the system itself was attacked from inside. for quite some time. I mean, the RAF existed for 28 years. That's more than twice Hitler's Third Reich. It's 28 years. And this state, this country, this government had to prove that it's a democracy and at the same time not losing against a terrorist group.
And Rainer Hoffmeier, your grouping of anti-terrorist police knew in advance that Schleyer was a likely target?
In 1976, we arrested 2 members of the Red Army faction, and we found with them papers in which we could read what the Red Army faction wanted to do in 1977. The whole plan, and in this plan also was the General Attorney would be the next target. And we also found in this paper, check out HM, to check out Hans Martin Schleyer. And I myself wrote a telex to the state police of Baden-Württemberg that Hans Martin Schleyer could be the next target of the Red Army faction, and therefore he got protection by the police.
Stefan.
It's true that they had a feeling and they had informations about who would be the next target, but nobody could really be sure, and it's very hard to guard somebody so directly that nothing really can happen.
Yes.
Peter Jürgen Volk, why was Schleyer chosen? Was it simply because he was a top businessman? Was there some other reason? You were very much in on this operation against him.
Of course, we know he was an SS officer, a friend of Heydrich in Prague, and for us was the person that showed the, how can I say,
continuity.
Yeah, of the Nazi system into the reality of these German 70s.
You stopped the Schleyer car. What happened next? You were on a road between destinations.
It was a small road, a very small road. The cars couldn't go left, couldn't go right. They crashed in each other, and it was a very dangerous situation for us.
Because the 2 cars crashed, everything started going wrong.
Yeah, and the policemen reacted very quick. They shoot.
And what did you do then?
The part of the group that was involved in the direct crash, they started to shoot at the driver and at the police car, and the police shooted back, and for a moment the situation got out of order.
2 policemen died?
Yeah.
And the driver of the car?
And the driver, yeah.
And that wasn't in the plan?
That was in the plan.
You were going to shoot them anyway?
Yeah.
You left the police dead, and the driver dead?
Yeah, and those who got Schleyer direct out of the car were not sure if he's still alive because of that massive shootings. So around the corner there was a van placed, and Schleyer was brought into this van, and he was alive.
And did you have a plan for what was going to happen to him then?
Well, the plan was to tell the government, the German government, that we want those and those and those prisoners being released and brought to the Middle East, and then we would have Schleyer out of
imprisonment. So this was going to be a bargaining chip?
Yeah.
But it didn't work out that way?
No, it didn't.
Rainer Hoffmeier.
We were sure that we would find the safe house in which Hans Martin Schleyer was held, and a local police officer in the field got the information exactly to the safe house in which Hans Martin Schleyer was held.
And Peter, you were with him at that time in this house?
Yes, I was there, and was able to hear that there is a person going around the house ringing at each door, at each level. But when nobody opened, he went to the next door and so on.
But it must have been an extraordinary feeling. You were there with your prisoner, and there was a policeman out on the other side of the door who didn't try to come in.
It would have been the death of Hans-Martin Schleyer and mine too.
But you have to know that this apartment was rented by a member of the Red Army faction using a false paper which was in our computer system. But we never got this information.
Hans-Martin Schleyer's hostage-takers released a video of him appealing to the government. And then, on October the 13th, 1977, a month after the kidnapping, the crisis escalated. A Palestinian group, acting in solidarity with the Red Army faction, hijacked a Lufthansa Boeing 737 with 86 passengers on board. Their leader demanded the release of the Red Army prisoners in Stammheim.
They've threatened if the West German government does not accede to their demands, then they will blow up the pirated aircraft.
On October the 16th, the plane's captain was executed by the hijackers.
The government spokesman, the official spokesman, Klaus Berling, described the shooting as a monstrous crime.
The killing was witnessed by his traumatized crew. Chancellor Helmut Schmidt had to decide whether or not to refuse to free the Stammheim prisoners.
What was on stake was the credibility of the Western civilization to stand up against such kind of threat and blackmail.
4 passengers were released. Schmidt ordered German special forces to storm the plane. All 4 hijackers died, and all the remaining 82 passengers and 4 crew survived.
Unfortunately, we have lost the captain, but the joy to be alive was so overwhelming that, of course, for me it was a 80% happy end.
I'm very doubtful about this announcement, in no way certain that it is a real suicide.
On the morning of October the 18th, Andreas Baader, Gudrun Enslin and their colleague Irmgard Müller were found dead in their cells. On hearing this news, the Red Army faction members, by now in Brussels with their captive Hans-Martin Schleyer, shot him in the back of the head and put the body in the boot of a car and released this statement.
After 43 days, we have ended Hans-Martin Schleyer's pathetic and corrupt existence. Chancellor Schmidt can pick him up from a green Audi 100 parked in Mühlhausen.
Peter Bog, do you have knowledge of who actually fired the fatal shot?
Yes, I have.
You know who it was?
Yeah.
But you won't tell us the name?
No.
What do you feel now about being part of, despite his background, what seems a particularly cruel kidnapping and killing?
There is no possibility to legitimize these things we have done. It was criminal, and all the ideological reasons that were named, well, they don't mean nothing against this cruel attack.
You now feel that that was cruel and unnecessary and a dreadful thing to do?
Yes.
This was an extraordinary hijacking, Stefan Alster. Was it a total surprise that RAF had taken this turn, enormous turn, to hijack an entire plane?
Well, it was not the first time that a plane was hijacked from Palestinian groups, and it was known that the Palestinian terrorists worked together with the Red Army faction. I think you could expect that something else would happen.
Rainer Hoffmeier.
The Red Army faction would be a part of a worldwide revolutionary movement. We had supporters in Europe, the Italian Red Brigades, the Action Directe, and also Belgian groups. And the attack Schleyer, and also the attack against the General Attorney Buback, was an attack to set their own prisoners free, not a direct movement in the way of revolution.
But the fact that the hijacking was unsuccessful was a huge boost for
Yes.
all peace-loving Germans,
Yes.
and particularly for the
Yes.
Chancellor Helmut Schmidt.
Yes, yes.
Stefan.
He had luck as well. because he made a very delicate decision to send the special forces of GSG 9 to Mogadishu to liberate the passengers of the kidnapped Lufthansa plane. I'm not sure whether any chancellor today would make a decision like that, and he was lucky that it worked. And he always said afterwards, if that would have been ended in a catastrophe like blowing up the plane or whatsoever, he would have resigned. So he was very clear, and I think the people had the feeling that this government would fight terrorism.
I want to ask you about the death of Ulrike Meinhof. She committed suicide before the others. Were you surprised that she had taken her own life when you heard about it?
No, because the whole idea of this terrorism always has to make yourself into a victim yourself.
A martyr.
A martyr. So suicide was always part of the whole game. And Ulrike Meinhof, I think, was the most important person in the group in order to make the group public and well known, because she was a very well known journalist before that. I think without her, the whole Red Army faction would never have been such a big thing. And then you could see inside the court during the trial, you could see that there was a difference between her and Gudrun Enslin and Andreas Baader. And if you read the letters they sent to each other later, which we didn't know at that time, you could see that there was almost hate between them. And she, in a certain way, tried to get out of the group. You can see that in what she said on trial. So I think suicide was the only way for her to get out.
Then later, her former colleagues were found dead, 4 of them at least, one morning about 18 months later in the Stammheim prison. Peter Jürgen Volk, what were your feelings when you heard of this, that a lot of the people who had perhaps inspired you had killed themselves in Stammheim?
I have known before that this would happen if our action fails. They told us long before that they will commit suicide when we failed. It was a pressure they put on us. If you fail, we are dead.
Who brought them the guns?
In that time I was a master of guns, you can say, and first of all they were little guns by the way they were built. Second, it was stripped part by part or brought in to Stammheim in the trail of Stammheim, not into the prison.
So you knew of this plan quite early on as the gunmaster, you said?
Yeah, because I have to strip that guns and put it into pieces, and, well, I did. It was their wish, and in that time, for me, their wish was kind of order.
A forest on the outskirts of the German city of Stuttgart a week ago. An army of police scattered deep in the trees are in attendance at a funeral.
On the 27th of October 1977, Andreas Baader, Gudrun Enslin and Jan Karl Rasper were buried. Their supporters raised clenched fists. Jonathan Dimbleby was there.
The mourners attend this day, some masked against police scrutiny, as an act of defiance. The demonstrations of support at the funeral near Stuttgart ended in scuffles.
That evening, there was a demonstration in the centre of Stuttgart. West German terrorism over the previous decade had been responsible for the loss of 27 lives. 102 people had been the target of attempted murder. 94 terrorists were in prison, but many more were still being hunted down.
These wanted posters are on display in government buildings throughout the country, with faces staring out balefully to remind Germans of the threat they still face.
Those responsible for Hans-Martin Schleyer's murder were still at large.
This van is an example of the technology which enables German police to pin down a suspect even while on the move.
There is no doubt that a number of lawyers are criminals.
Meanwhile, the right, which had its roots in Bavaria, had widespread support for advocating fiercer measures against the terrorists. Its most prominent leader was the politician Franz Josef Strauss.
How did the explosives come into the jail, the pistols, the transistor radios, the tape recorders, and so on.
You are accusing the lawyers of having done that?
Of course.
Those allegations were fiercely denied. The Baader Meinhof gang continued for another 15 years, claiming another 20 victims. And then in 1998, an 8-page letter arrived in the Cologne office of the Reuters news agency declaring that the urban guerrilla in the form of the RAF is now history.
They were glad to have you murdering people and robbing banks.
What do you achieve by repeating this word, murdering?
Horst Mahler, one of the founding members, spoke to the BBC's Today programme.
In the war you have to kill people, even innocent people. But don't misunderstand, that is not my position today, that it was right, but I tell you what was our thinking in doing that.
Well, Kurt Grunewald, we heard Franz Josef Strauss, a well-known, famous Bavarian politician, blaming left-wing radical lawyers for so much, facilitating the guns that the Stammerheim prisoners could get. What's your attitude to that? I mean, a lot of people must have believed what he said at the time.
If you look at the deeds of lawyers bringing weapons inside the prisons, that's a crime. That's very clear. The lawyers are not sentenced because of this point, but it's very probably that's it. So, but the campaign of the government and the BKA against lawyers was not a right campaign, but it is, for us, it is close to campaigns in the United States in those times. It's now, I'm looking at Russia, I'm looking at Turkey. It's always the same, that the lawyers will be taken for the deeds of their clients.
They're responsible for the deeds.
And we were very active. We were active because of prison conditions, because of hindering the defense, and we were active in Germany and in foreign countries. That's not nice for a government, that's clear, but we were fighting for our rights.
Stefan asked, how important in Germany's post-war history do you think the existence of the RAF, the Baader Meinhof gang, was?
I think it was a very, very important part of the post-war history of Germany. It was one of the biggest dramas we had in the post-war history. And I think everything you can say about the legal system, about the police, about the government, about how to treat prisoners, how to treat lawyers, or lawyers how to treat the system, really was attacked during this time.
What was it that made the Baader Meinhof, the RAF, last so long, longer, as you say, than Hitler's Reich?
Because in a certain way they were part of a worldwide struggle, which they took into the center of the cities. So in a certain way they were really what they claimed to be a part of a worldwide struggle on the wrong place. But nevertheless, that was the only reason why they existed so long, because they had supporters.
Rainer Hoffmeier.
I think that the movement of the Red Army faction could only be started because of the situation after the Second World War and after the Third Reich, and because of the next generation was more political and had more ideology against the Nazi ideology, and also it wasn't solved the question what the parents had done during the Third Reich.
You think this is quite an important factor?
That was an important factor. For me, I have been in the same time. I had not this situation in my family. They weren't involved in any Nazi events.
Peter Jürgen, you were on the run from the police, from the authorities for 4 whole years. What was that like for you, and how were you eventually tracked down and caught?
When I left the Red Army faction, I was sure that I will be caught sooner or later. I have to pay for what I did, and maybe I will pay for the rest of my life.
How were you apprehended eventually?
I was living in Hamburg, and we needed some money from a bank, but not robbing it, but taking a credit. a person I know from Frankfurt visited me outside the bank before we could put up this credit, and then I was arrested.
Did this come as a surprise?
No.
Was it a bit of a relief?
Yes, also.
Rainer Hofmeier, were you involved in the tracking down of all the people that you could find?
I was.
Yeah.
And
was it a difficult job?
It was a difficult job, but it also was a job I liked to do. Because of not only the hunting, but also because of the organization, to the power to deal with information. And my last part of the hunt was a shooting in Bad Kleinen, where one member of the Red Army faction committed suicide and killed before a policeman of the GSG-9. And that was for me the end of my duty.
Peter Boak.
I had a trial, I had a second trial, and I went for years into prison.
It was many years, wasn't it?
Yeah, 18 years.
Do you now regret everything that happened, or were there some things that you thought were necessary?
Regret is not the right word. It's part of my life. Shame is the right word.
Peter Jürgen Boak, Rainer Hofmeier, Kurt Grunewald and Stefan Aust. Thank you all very much indeed.